Pimani Baloyi joins us now in studio. Pimani, the history and legacy of Hosi N'wamitwa is storied, but more importantly, it's filled with complication within itself, and one that didn't come with ease. Talk to us about who Hosi N'wamitwa was and how she came to ascend the throne.
Good evening, Oliver, and good evening to our viewers. Oliver, today actually marked the end of an era where we saw the late Hosi N'wamitwa being laid to rest. Oliver, she's known as, from what they say historically, she's an educator by profession who's taught at numerous schools, and she's also grown through the ranks at the education department in Limpopo, where we've seen her being a circuit manager, but also the firstborn child of the late Hosi Phylia N'wamitwa. But in terms of her legacy, also you've heard President Cyril Ramaphosa speaking at length. She was also a freedom fighter. Oliver, we understand that she was also part of the CODESA talks in 1993 and in 1992, but she was also, Oliver, this is something that a lot of people don't know, which is what also contributed to the president taking the decision to actually afford her this Category 2 state funeral. She was one of the first cohort of MPs in the country during the first democratic government. We understand she may have been an MP for about 4 administrations. So her contribution is quite immersive, but also as a traditional leader, her biggest claim to fame was that 2008 court ruling N'wamitwa versus N'wamitwa, which actually took her cousin to court after they had said traditionally the Batsonga people cannot allow a woman to ascend a throne. And we saw in 2008 the Constitutional Court, when the case actually landed at the Concord, after going numerous years at lower courts, the Concord ruled that she should take over her father's throne. So part of the things that we've seen, you know, Oliver, if you were watching that funeral, a lot of political leaders were present at that funeral, from your Julius Malema, Floyd Shivambu, the former premiers of Limpopo. Everyone was there saying, this is a woman who has contributed immensely to not only to rural development as a traditional leader in a village, but also to ensuring that, you know, people get an education. At a point, I heard one of the speakers talking about how she would also source funding to sort of support community development. One even mentioned that she got money from the American singer who also built, you know, a community health center, education center for the youth in that community. But other things that were mentioned, Oliver, I'm going to bring in something that one of her first grandchildren said at the funeral, talking about how she advocated for education. Let's listen in.
She contributed to the CODESA negotiations that laid the foundation for South Africa's democratic breakthrough. 1994 was a prolific year for my grandmother. It is the year of our first democratic election, the year she was sworn in as a member of parliament, and, to top the list, the year that I was born. Being her first born-free grandchild, coupled with having been named after her, always made me feel like the sky wasn't the limit whenever I dreamt. The sky was simply what we stood on to reach the stars. Granny was always soft-spoken, slow to anger, quick to encourage, and gentle in her upliftment. I remember when I was accepted into law school at the University of Johannesburg, she called me during the first week of classes just to say, "Mwananga, I'm so proud of you." During my second year of law school, the law of succession was one of my core modules. Her historic court battle of N'wamitwa versus N'wamitwa was presented as a case study under customary law. I knew at that moment I had to ace this module. I did indeed get a distinction for that module. And as the results came in, she was the first person I called. A 5-minute conversation ended up being almost an hour. That Christmas, when I came to visit her, as we annually did for Christmas and other holidays, she quietly pulled me aside and asked me to accompany her to her room. There, she gifted me her personal leather-bound collection of Hansards. These books essentially are parliamentary debates and proceedings that ensure transparency and accountability for public record. She had collected these reports in her 15 years as a parliamentary member, and I still keep them as my prized possessions more than 10 years later. There are many stories I could share about my grandmother and her amazing traits, her humility, how she never moved with any security as she wanted to be as close to her community as possible.
Pimani, this seems to have been a precedent-setting case, the 2008 case, and I wanted to double-click in there because it sets precedents for many other such battles across many other chieftaincies and traditional authorities in Limpopo. In how is it shaped up what, as her grandson talks about the law of succession, tells us today?
Yes, Oliver, the law of succession is one of the most prominent things that we should talk about because there are two issues to this, Oliver. The first one is who succeeds her now, because traditionally, African law is quite clear what happens with men when they are on traditional thrones, but it's not, it's actually called a sacred practice for each traditional house to sort of decide who then takes over the throne. And in this specific case, we've been told the Baloyis are still in mourning. They will figure out what then happens, who succeeds Hosi N'wamitwa II, and who then takes on. But the second thing, the precedents that you're talking about, this case, Oliver, it has emboldened other females. We do know there is an ongoing court battle for the Bavenda throne where Princess Masindi Pepu has taken on her uncle, who was the erstwhile king of the Bavenda people. He was removed by a court ruling, the Constitutional Court, referring that matter back to the Polokwane High Court, where we've seen for the past 2 months both Princess Masindi and the erstwhile king giving their arguments why they should ascend that throne. So that's the first thing. It has set a precedence, given women the confidence that should you feel disgruntled that you cannot occupy your own father's throne, go to the courts. The courts might rule in your favor. So that's the first thing, Oliver. A lot of women we've seen since that court ruling, a lot of women go into the courts hoping that the courts will rule in their favor. And the court has made it clear it is discrimination if your only basis is the fact that
it's the same
this
set
person
of
is female.
facts at play in the Queen Mujaji case, which is also still alive in our courts.
So the Queen Mujaji case, Oliver, is sort of a different issue. It's sort of different because in a way that throne is currently set for females, and we know that all along since the death of Queen Makubu Mujaji, we've always known that Princess Masala Nabo, who is now Queen Masala Nabo, would take over. But now the royal family, a faction of that royal family, is saying no, it has never been set aside for females. We can install the princess's brother, Prince Likukela. So in this instance, it's actually a male child fighting to ascend his mother's throne, and them saying traditionally there is a long history that shows that there were males who occupied that throne. So what's currently happening in Mujaji, Oliver, is that Princess Masala Nabo, or Queen Masala Nabo, has been recognized by President Ramaphosa. We saw her today at the funeral looking beautiful, accompanied by her former foster parents, Dr. Mutsecha and Minister Mutsecha. And they've been saying she is the rightful person. So the president has recognized her, he's issued that certificate of recognition. But we do know since last year there was supposed to be a coronation ceremony to officially install her, but her brother went to court, and we are waiting for a court date in the Pretoria High Court to find out how this will happen. So it's quite interesting that in Bulovedu, if a male is saying, I have the right to ascend my mother's throne, while Masindi and the late Hosi N'wamitwa were saying, I, as a female, have the right to also sit on this throne. So it's going to be quite interesting.
I want us to place Hosi N'wamitwa in context of Batsonga holistically. She's but one of several chiefs that existed in Batsonga culture, which is distinctly different from other cultures and traditional practices in South Africa around chieftaincies and kingship. Batsonga don't seemingly have a king.
Yes, Oliver, you do remember that there's been numerous commissions that were set up by presidents to look over kingships and queenships.
Yes.
And the first one, the Khatla Commission, found that the Batsonga actually never had an overarching king. And we do know Hosi N'wamitwa of the Bachangani in Bushbuckridge has also contested that throne, and his contestation was set aside. But most recently, we saw Wilson Mkari of the Mkari Royal House also saying he is actually king of the Batsonga people, and a panel by the president was set up to sort of look into that claim. So putting Hosi N'wamitwa in the context of the Batsonga people, We know there are several senior traditional leaders who Hosi N'wamitwa was one of them. We know there's the Mhlaba traditional leadership. There is the Numalo traditional leadership. But all of them we know individually, they are senior traditional leaders in their communities. But up until to this point, there hasn't been an overarching king that oversees the Batsonga people as a people. But currently, the biggest question since Hosi N'wamitwa's passing is what then happens? Who now, is there a vacuum currently now that she's passed on? But we do know even Premier Dr. Popira Matuba today, when she was passing a tribute, emphasized the royal family is the only entity that has the right to decide what then happens, and they will forward a name to that to her office and that of the cooperative governance. So at this point, Oliver, the succession question is very big.
It remains wide open.
The family stays, they are still in mourning, and after the mourning period, we might know what will then happen.
So just very quickly, how long do we know the mourning period to be?
We've been told it could go between 3 to 6 months. That's when we are likely to find out what will then happen.
Okay.
But Oliver, I want to emphasize there are still pending questions. There are vendor throne question. I haven't even mentioned the Bapedi question. Oliver, we do know that the late King Tulari died in 2020, and he at the time we were told, even though he was married with children, none of them were candle wives, and there is no heir. And currently, right now, his mom, who actually spoke at the funeral, has been fighting to be recognized as regent, and she has been given the right to act in his stead. But his half-brother wants that throne. So there's a lot of questions happening in terms of traditional leadership in Limpopo, Oliver.
Yeah, certainly. Thank you so much for that, Pimani. Really do appreciate it.